Well, hello, friends, and thank you for joining me and my colleague Alan Rowe in another of the episodes that he's recording about his not only his spiritual path, but his work in education. And he's invited a colleague whom I know and really admire, Trace Pickering, to share with us the work that he's experienced not only during his career, but recently in going to many different educational models that purport to be innovative, creative, etc., and seeing how they really reach into the student in a deeper way than learning the curriculum. I know that the word curriculum is not Trace's favorite word, so we'll we'll expect an essay on that from him as we proceed. Al, thanks for inviting Trace, and why don't you tell us a little bit about how the two of you got to know each other in your careers and what brought you here today?
Oh, hey, thanks, Bill. Yeah, it's been, I would say, probably the late 80s when Trace and I connected when he was a high school English teacher and a basketball coach. Um, and I got to know him, and we started exploring all kinds of things, particularly in the area of assessment as learning. And we found a kind of a kinship there and had a lot of commonality. And so we've learned a lot together. We've co-created things together, software, a company, sessions, programs, and but most important, I think we share. Um, you might say we share a soul as it relates to how deeply human we are in regard to how we view education and all those around us. And so we kind of look at things from a human potential point of view, uh, and kind of let the world of separation and grading and selecting and sorting kind of trail way behind. And so we kind of see things differently and in beautiful ways. And thus, we have a lot of shared friends and colleagues who kind of add to that whole dialogue all the time. So, but it's nice to be on this. Trace and I don't get together too often anymore, but we still have the means to do it because we don't live too far away. So,
Great. Well, Trace, if your shared experience with Al it began with this idea of assessment is learning, I hope I'm not misrepresenting it. Why don't you say a little more about that and then tell us about the learner empowerment aspects of how your career unfolded?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. It's so great to be here. It's kind of a full circle moment, honestly. But I'll start uh, when I first decided to become a teacher and a coach. I decided I wanted to do that because there was a particular teacher and coach that fundamentally altered the course of my life. Without him, I'm not sure things would have worked out so well. And so I thought, well, he's such a great teacher and coach. I'm going to be just like him. Right. And so when I got to the classroom, I tried to be just like him. And as a 22-year-old, I couldn't have put words to this like I can now. But I just, I realized that he wasn't the best teacher for all the kids. Right. And I wasn't the best teacher for all the kids. And at 3:30, I saw a complete transformation in kids. School would end and I would go down to the locker room to go to football practice or basketball practice, and I'd walk past the choir room and the theater, and the same kids I saw an hour before whose eyes were dead and they could barely stay awake were full of life, right? Fully engaged and willing to make mistakes and try hard and work together, and they weren't looking at the clock wondering when practice was over. And that was the seed for me to start questioning things. A few years later, um, I got involved. I don't even know how I got involved, Al, but with the Iowa Success Network. And that's where I met Al. And Al had this dynamic guy he was following named Bill Spady, an outcome-based education. And so I started pouring into that. And OBE spoke to me. It was everything that I thought was missing in schools, right? We were just doing all the wrong things for the right reasons, I guess. And so that started that journey, and assessment as learning was one of the first places that we looked, challenge testing and grading and all of that. And instead of assessment as evaluation, we really looked at how do you assess and give kids feedback to help them get better, which is essentially what great coaches do, right? Great.
Exactly so. Yes. Bravo.
Right.
Mhm.
And so that began our journey. As a young man, I was fortunate enough to sit at your knee and at Al's knee, and Al was gracious enough to take me many, many times to see you across the country and get to know you and your team. And he's the one that helped me get started in doing my own presentations. And he suffered through really poor performances by me until I figured it out. But all of those things just kept me moving forward and thinking very differently. And then about 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to really delve into social systems theory, particularly Russell Ackoff and Jamshid Grajadagi. And they're essentially speaking the language of OBE, giving it a larger container in terms of here's how social systems should be organized to maximize human potential and growth and satisfaction and joy, all of those things. And so it was those kind of two major things of pieces of learning that came together for me and allowed me to form these kind of thinkings. And then I'd always learn from all of you and places that opportunities fly by us all the time. But if we're not in a presence to see the opportunity come by, we don't see it. And so I was able to notice an opportunity arise in 2012 in our community that allowed me to take advantage of starting a program that would try to bring to life all these things that we collectively have learned and been talking about.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I just want to clarify a couple of things about outcome-based education that I happen to have learned over the last 60 years. And one of them is that the whole approach was about expanding what I call the conditions of success for students. And that got boiled down to basically getting graded, which means labeled and ranked, okay, in ink. And I devised this thing I called a Spadyism, which was opportunity ends when you get graded in ink. Because once it's in ink, there's nothing you can do about it, no matter how much more you learn.
Exactly.
And no matter how much better you get at whatever it is, the opportunity is over. And that what the three of us realized is how much of a constrained opportunity system good old standard education really is. I mean, it is profoundly boxed in by the clock, schedule, and calendar, and the things that we do on those particular dates. The other thing that's important to me, and I think that's why the three of us are together also, is what do you mean by an outcome? Because in the early days of developing this concept, the outcome was nothing but, well, what's in the curriculum? So take the curriculum as it is and try to expand opportunities or be flexible with opportunities around that. And it wasn't until I'm going to say the very late 80s that we realized that there could and should be learning results for students that were targeted toward that have to do with the human being and what the human being is going to be doing in the future as they live their life not simply how's your transcript doing? How's your class rank doing? Okay, I mean, everybody is a walking, talking GPA. I mean, who cares once you're about 2 weeks out of high school what
Right.
your GPA was, or all of that stuff? It is just ridiculous how trapped we are in these cultural rituals and belief systems.
Mhm.
And what I saw in both of you is how willing and how able you were, how really creative you were in stepping out of that and looking at the human being, both the student human being and the faculty, colleague human being.
Mhm.
So Al, you might want to jump in there because I know you were one of the
Absolutely.
first in the hot water with me on some of
Listen.
these topics.
Yeah, so I thank you for reviewing that, Bill. Yeah, so for me, I've kind of looked at it this way, and maybe it'll set the table for what we're going to discuss today. So we went from grades, and what Bill was kind of describing, and I kept thinking grades to grave. Drop the D, put in the V. As soon as you're graded, it's over, you're done, blah, blah, blah. So it's grades to graves. And along the way, in my 50 years, and particularly it's so powerful right now, is in between those crazy polarities of grading and being in the grave, which we all have that kind of hanging with us. In the center, what lives so richly in my heart is grace. And it's grace that's found in deep, loving presence of right now. This moment that we've just had together opens up so many different ways of thinking about the infinite potential of human beings, how we can converge what is happening in science in our current world, and really, you might say we're in a place now where we can optimize and amplify all the goodness in human beings, starting through the heart and the love, and really, you might say, be more grounded in terms of just everything, not just school, but everything that kind of open you up to. It's almost like you're completing your soul as opposed to, what do you want me to do to get some points so that you can label me and then we'll be done? Because it really raises the question, in a sense, is what is completion? Well, completion in the school side was, when are we done and what do I got to turn in? Well, completion now is basically, to me, it's about how can I grow some goodness, gratefulness, and really live in a whole different way that I would call grace, oneness, and the divine. And frankly, that is the journey that was getting amplified back in, well, Trace probably in the 80s for us. And so here we are today as partners in a conversation that I look forward to as we all kind of free ourselves from those past experiences and can find the depth of what occurs in presence.
Well, you said two words that I'm going to jump on here and ask either one of you who wants to comment on. And that is, was our system back then ready for words like love and divinity or the divine in people? And is it, if it was or wasn't, is it any different or has it changed now? So, yeah, Trace, you want to comment on that because you're out there among these innovative, cutting edge models.
Mhm. Yeah, I would say, back in the early days, no, that wouldn't have been something that we probably would have thought of or that would have been accepted. And then I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, it started to gain some traction. Um, where people were willing to open up and think about school and education as something more than a contest or a score or, dumping in of knowledge. And I think, honestly, and I can speak from personal experience, it's scary. It's scary to start thinking in these kind of ways about your own personal purpose and where you're at in the larger world and what it means to be with yourself, right? Those are scary things. And I think in the current context, we're seeing a push away again from that, from the larger society. And I always say, the world is super complex. We have inadequate tools to try to understand that complexity, let alone deal with it. And when people feel that, they retreat back to what they think they know and what feels safe. What's one of the safest places in a community if I want to go back to the way it was? School. I can walk back into a school and I can see desks and rows and lectures, and the gym still smells like it did in 1984. And I can feel comfortable there and safe. But it's certainly not a place of growth and human development.
Al, what do you think?
What I think is, as I described, just the narrowness of grading and actually the narrow orientation of outcomes back then, it was a needed conversation for sure. And there's elements of it that are still relevant today. But what occurred over the period of time, and particularly after the length of my career, is I came to the conclusion by experiencing school through the people, every student, every parent, every colleague, every person, my whole life was shaped by them on me as human beings. I feel who I am came from all of them. And so what happened is the shift in me is, I mean, it isn't a week goes by, where we lose a student that, perhaps died because the students were just a little bit younger than me, and you start seeing the impact that they had. But a long time ago, you know what? My school experience was defined by the relationships and the hearts and souls of all of it in front of me, and I'm so glad that I paid attention to the human side and could figure out ways of how to manage the archaic parts of the system, because this is entirely a human experience. And so that ultimately, here's what really fills my heart is, and then you see your own children and your own grandchildren, and I think I said this on the last time we visited, Bill, when my grandson comes up to me and he says, "Grandpa, schools don't care about your superpowers." And I said, "Liam, what do you mean?" He said, "I'm interested in this, and let me show you these books I'm reading, and what, Grandpa, what do you think of about black holes and things like that?" He's 12, and he's asking me all these things, but he's doing it in a way that he is fully alive and curious, and and all human beings are that way by nature. And so the essence of presence and experiencing oneself with that has made my lifetime actually everything. Everything is complete as the truth of what I experienced because of the people, and that includes everybody in a community. So there are so many different opportunities on how we can get more closer to the truth of our experience through one another than looking at the archaic practices that began a long, long time ago. So,
Trace, you used the word scary. You said it was scary. And to me, that evoked two thoughts. And I'd like your response to this. One of the scary is stepping out of line from the culture, the systemic culture that's bred into education. That you don't want to be a troublemaker, you don't want to be an exception, all right, that draws too much attention, etc. And it might not be from colleagues, it's from the community individuals, all right, who have either a belief system to protect or an axe to grind. And they're looking for people to be their next victim, as it were. So one is that way. And the other scary is when you get it, when you realize the kinds of things that the two of you see, that if you just play the role in a very routine, mechanistic way, go through the motions, send in the attendance cards, okay, and do the grading the way it's supposed to be, but be sure you don't give too many A's, because we know how that's supposed to be. Okay, to step out of that yourself when you know better, if I may say it that way, that's scary too. That's scary in a different sort of way. And my sense is that Al found just a magic way of moving through that stereotypic, okay, constrained system. But I've never really heard your story about how that unfolded, which I think is extremely important here. Okay, because what I knew is you went from the guy in the public schools to suddenly creating this incredibly, to me, impressive, okay, empowerment oriented alternative model. Okay, boy, that's a huge leap. So tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, I love the way you frame the two types of scary. I think that's spot on. Those two types of fear really keep us from moving forward. I think like all things, I had to change first, and part of that process was learning all these things from all these great wise people and trying to make sense of it myself. And then for a period of time, I thought if I could just get people who are in the positions, namely like superintendents, who are in the position to make it happen, if I could just show them the way and convince them and support them, that they would take action. And so I did that through a intermediate service agency. And for 10 years, they'd all nod their heads and go, yep, this is what we need to do. And then nobody would do anything. And I think I finally got to the point in my own development where I quit being scared. And I'm sure a part of it had to do with age. And I knew I was in a place that if people told me I was crazy and I should leave, that I had the ability to do that, and somebody else would take me in and whatever. So that kind of fear fell away. And then I'd stayed connected with Al, and we had another gentleman in our community named Chuck Peters, who thought this way and was in a position of power, honestly, in our community. And he kind of gave me that little bit of courage to step out. And when we happened upon trying the right kinds of experiments to get our community to give us a little bit of space to play, it took two courageous school board presidents, to elbow out some space and let me go. And once we started going, we put up with a lot of crap. I mean, it was worse internally than externally. Teachers trying to chip away and kill it, or administrators trying to knock it down. But by that stage in my career, I'd finally developed the confidence to go, you know what, to hell with it. Let's just do it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. By this time, I've started to remove my own ego, right? So like this thing falls apart and everybody thinks I'm an idiot. so be it. I don't care, right? This isn't about me. And I think all of those things, I wouldn't have been able to do that 10 years before that. My ego would have been too tied up with my identity. So I think it was just, I think it's like everything else. You have to change yourself first. You have to grow inside yourself first before you can bring something out into the world. And the other thing I was thinking is you were talking about the scary part. My co-founder of Iowa Big contacted me a couple months ago. He goes, "You wouldn't believe it. He's in the private sector now. He's like, you wouldn't believe it. All these businesses are asking for exactly what we were trying to give them at Iowa Big." And it immediately caused me to remember a great quote from Jamshid Rashidagi. He said, and Bill, I mean, you live this. It's often more tragic to be ahead of your time than behind it. And I think the only way we're going to change things is we have to have people brave enough to live through the tragedy of being ahead of your time.
I would like you to share with us more about Iowa Big itself. Okay, we're dropping the name, but that's the name you gave to this alternative. But tell our viewers what was the essence of the model? In what way did you reach out, etc.?
Iowa Big was a community-based, multiple high school, project-based experience where the students really had deep ownership of themselves, their own growth, and they lived themselves in terms of in the most authentic, empowered ways you could imagine. And it got the attention of many different groups from not just our own community, but from around the world. And Trace and his faculty and staff and the early adopters really created just a wealth of wisdom and insights that certainly Trace could show some examples of it and what it meant, and he gave me an opportunity to interview a whole bunch of them and how they were living the experience of education and really drawing the things out of themselves that they didn't even realize was in them. And so it's a beautiful thing. Trace, what would you add?
Yeah, really quick kind of origin story, because it ties back to the whole kind of part of the fear conversation is over time, I also realized that any effort a school undertook to really break the bounds of the traditional culture failed, and usually the community lashed out. And so Sean and I had a unique opportunity to engage our community. We're like, the community needs to tell us what they want. And so we took 60 community leaders and we sent them back to high school to be students for a day. And I got 8 principal friends of mine to agree to help me with it, under the rule that we'd never share which high schools of the 30 some in the area that participated. But that fundamentally changed how they saw education. They all of a sudden remembered what they had forgotten, that school was boring, that the content they were learning had no real meaning to them, even as adults, that they couldn't connect things together. And so they essentially came back with 3 things that they noticed. Kids are bored, teachers are working their tails off to connect with kids, and the way that school's organized by separating disciplines and subjects out decontextualizes all the content, and decontextualized learning is not sticky. It doesn't, if you don't have anything to hang it on, it falls down. And so then we asked them, all right, well, now that you've experienced being a high school student with adult eyes and experiences, how would you redesign it? And they came back with 3 things. Passion. They said, show me a person who has passion, and I'll show you a successful person. I'll show you an engaged person. Everybody has passions. 5-year-old has passion about dinosaurs. It's still a passion, right? You can teach a bunch of kids stuff through their love of dinosaurs or basketball or playing the trombone or whatever it is, history. But if you allow a school to assume that kids have no individual passions to pursue, much like Al shared about his grandson, you lose them. So I said, focus on kids' passions. We believe that good teachers can take whatever that passion is and create really powerful learning moments. The second is give them real work to do. One of our participants, I'll remember this to the day I die. He said, anyone ever willing to acknowledge that 99% of what we ask kids to do in school is fake? Sean and I are like, whoa, what? It's like, it's fake work. What do the kids do with it as soon as they get that beautiful or horrible grade on that paper? They throw it away, right? And the learning goes with it. We have so many problems and opportunities in our community to do real work. Why aren't we asking kids to do real work? If the standards are really that important, they should appear in real life contexts and real life projects. And if they don't, we should probably question those standards. And the third was they can't do this without community. Learning is a communal thing. Our community needs to be a part of that. And we continue to lock our high school kids up in this building so that we don't have to worry about them shoplifting or loitering or whatever other weird thing they think high school kids do. So Sean, my co-founder, and I just took that Passion Projects community, and it fit exactly with the model of education that you and Al and the rest of us believe about. And we were given a playground to play in, and now we had 60 community members. We could say it's there. They're the ones who said to create this, not this crazy educator here. And so once we would launch, I think that gave those school board presidents the air cover and the courage to give us a sandbox to play in. And early on, when there was lots of critics, we had 60 community members who in their networks and circles were saying positive things about this instead of negative. And so that's kind of the origin story of how we were able to launch something very, very different in a community that isn't always that accepting of change. I think Al would agree with that about our community. So.
Well, thank you. I would like to just throw in a little bit of an experience I had at a very elite high school in the Chicago area. And the superintendent came to know our work and what our work was all about. And he had this high school where 95% of the kids go to college. So my phrase for that was, well, we all died and they all go to heaven because they're all going to college. Okay. So everything is about going to college, and going to college. Okay. And the faculty is, most of the faculty had advanced degrees, et cetera. And he brought me in because I have my PhD from the University of Chicago. And in Chicago, that's regarded, it is nationally too, but as this elite intellectual place, et cetera. And he said, I couldn't have brought anybody else in who didn't have that kind of credibility to work with them. Okay. Mm. So the good news was I had the credentials, et cetera, to do it. Well, long and short of the story is that I was basically given free rein of the school to wander around and see what was happening, et cetera. And then eventually we had this big meeting with the department chairs. And this was back in the era where there was a rather famous television program on the educational channel called Great Performances. All right. And so they had videos of, all these remarkable Shakespeare plays and all this kind of stuff. So I'm wandering the halls. Now, this is 2,100 students, a massive building. And while classes are on, you could hear a pin drop because even though most of the teachers had their door open, it was deathly quiet. So I would just wander and kind of stand at doorways and look in. And what I saw is a classroom of kids like this, okay? Half the class like this. And the teacher up there doing all this tremendous stuff. And it was like, so what? It was so what? So anyway, when I met with the department chair people and they wanted some feedback, I said, well, you should rename the high school Great Performances. And the great performances are the faculty. Okay. The kids aren't doing anything. They don't care. Okay. I mean, yes, they'll do whatever they need to do to get their high grades so they can go to college, but it is a completely passive learning experience. There is no real engagement here. Well, fortunately, I had some credibility and some of them listened and on and on and on. But it was just a perfect example of what you were talking about when this gentleman said, well, school's boring. Well, yeah, even in an elite high school with super teachers, it's boring. All right. So the key is about engagement, which is what fuels the passion or what meets the passion. Okay. Etc. But anyway, tell us more. So how did it function and what worked and what didn't work? I mean, what were the things that really brought kids and made them alive?
Yeah, I think, to your point, one of the most difficult things we had to do at Big is get kids out of the passenger seat and into the driver's seat, to your point, because they've been used to being passengers for 12 years. Well, when we started, it was just my co-founder, Sean, and I. And so we were pretty agile. The two of us could just kind of agree to try stuff and do stuff. And Sean's a brilliant young man. And we just said, let's just talk to the kids. I think we had 12 kids our first year. Let's just talk to them and find out who they are, what they care about. And so Sean came up with this really beautiful question. He asked, so what makes you mad? That was one of his questions. What makes you mad? And the second question is, what do you get when you get up on Saturday morning? What do you do when it's your time? And the answers were pretty amazing. We had one young lady, who, incidentally, her dad worked for a testing company, and so she signed up for Big against her father's will, which was great in and of itself, and totally transformed her father's view, where he actually left the profession of testing. So that was fun. But anyway, he asked the question, what makes you mad? And this young lady says, well, you know what makes me mad? What makes me mad is I walk around my high school and all my girlfriends are following their boyfriends around like they're puppies. That's what makes me mad. And Sean's like, wow, what am I going to do with that? He's like, okay. So why do you think that is? And she's like, I don't think they understand the potential in front of them. I don't think they have the confidence to do and to be their own person. And they're looking for a place to hide, or somebody to hide behind, right? Or validate them. And so Sean said, all right, you're at Iowa Big, where passion and projects and community is our thing. What are you going to do about it? And so she went to work and came back to him, a short time later. She says, I want to start an organization called Success to the Power of She. And he's like, all right, tell me more. She's like, we got to get to these girls in middle school. They have to understand in middle school, when they're all full of angst and worried about what other people think, that's when we need to plant the seeds of, you are your own person. There is no ceiling. You've got to move forward. And so her ultimate goal was to do a TED Talk. She applied for a TED Talk and of course got rejected as a 17-year-old. And Sean said, okay, well, that's a failure. So what are you going to do about it? Right? She's like, well, I'll just make my own. I'll just have my own conference. He's like, great, go for it. What are you going to do? So she contacted the then Lieutenant Governor of Iowa, who was a female, Lisa Bluter, the head coach of Iowa women's basketball. She contacted a medical professional who had to do with how the brain functions and the female brain and all this kind of thing. And she connected with business women in the community and shared her vision, and they all bought in, got excited, and they helped her with resources and contacts. And at the end of the year, she put together a full day session with 200 middle school girls who came together to hear from these professionals and engage in conversation about what it means to be a young woman and what kind of potential is out there. That morphed in the next year to an online campaign of what if you went a week without wearing makeup and show people your authentic self, right? And she engaged other students, joined her team. And really that was the project that launched the projects at Iowa BIG. And people can say, well, where's the content learning in there? Like, where is it not? Right? I can point to almost all the English standards that she met. She's got sociology credit in spades. She had to learn about the science behind the things that she was studying. She had to build a network. She had to understand the politics of bringing the lieutenant governor in, who may or may not be liked by certain people. And most importantly, she found out who she was, right? And she's a dynamo to this day. She's an unstoppable force. So from that, Sean and I realized that our job was, yeah, projects was the vehicle, but our real job was to unleash potential like we did. We didn't create potential in this young woman. We didn't give it to her. We just created conditions for her to find it herself and to push on what she already wanted to push on. And so that became the model. Let kids decide what projects they want to work on. And the teacher's job is to wrap the standards and the content stuff around it, not the other way around. So we've had lots of successes. Our biggest struggle, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, was so many of the kids are used to just passively sitting there and collecting their grades and buying their time so they can graduate and get the hell out of there. To convince some of them to become the drivers of their own lives and their own learning and their own passions and their own failures is incredibly difficult. But the rewarding part is when you see a young person cross that chasm, it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And for us, it's a lot of times it happened 2 years after the young person left us. We would typically over winter break, these kids would roll in that had been with us a couple of years before. And they're like, hey, I just want to thank you guys. I know I wasn't a very good big student. I didn't really believe you for most of it, but they're like 6 months ago, I got it. I understand what you're trying to do. And you gave me space to figure that out. That's been the most beautiful thing. Were we successful with all of them? No. A lot of them just wanted to be told what to do and what to do next and what I need to do to get out of here so I can go, put my headphones on or TikTok somebody or whatever it was, right? So that's kind of the story of BIG. And as a leader, I felt my job was to make sure that my faculty had that same passion project community. And so very flat, I was like, you guys are making the decisions about what we're going to do. Obviously, I'm in the room, having some influence too. But my only job is to hold you accountable for what you say you're going to do. And I don't care if it fails. If it does, we're just going to go, well, isn't that a mystery? Let's figure out what to do next, right? So removing that failure, letting them stumble around with it. And I think the most important thing our faculty did is show the kids their humanity, right? that they made mistakes, that they had challenges at home that made them not be 100% today, that they had passionate areas that they would get self-absorbed into, right? All of the things, the human frailties and the strengths were all on display for kids. And I think that was way more powerful than any curriculum we could have designed for them.
Yeah, Trace, remember when we would interview the students each year, all of them, and many interviews, but students, when they say, you know, at Big, we had some really cool projects, and several of them would just pause and said, but you know what? I came to the point where I discovered, you know what? I was the project of myself. It wasn't what I was doing. And when they have that discovery, you're into a whole different way of experiencing the self. And those experiences lead to any number of more opportunities. And when they see that they have freedom that comes from everyday things that are on their mind and they can create from there, those moments of school don't resemble anything that they were seeing before. And it's just a beautiful thing. And because everything is relational here, the faculty start seeing that, the parents start seeing that, and it's kind of like, whoa, that's really true in life. It was in that moment, Trace, where I don't think I've ever mentioned it to you this way. I felt myself as a teacher, and many other folks came to it was like I used to teach social studies, okay, and teach government and things like that. And when we get into, you know, teaching about balance of powers and freedom and all that stuff, it was interesting. I was teaching content out there, but I really wasn't revealing inside myself of what it means to live free with choice. Well, that goes to the whole big model was touching the effect of the experience on the person and watching that blossom. And very, very powerful experience. So I appreciate the opportunity to just be in that space as it unfolded.
I do remember, Al, a couple of kids before the interview had started. Now, am I supposed to talk about my school experience or my big experience? Because they're really different.
Well, let's go for real, not fake.
Trace, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you that I think are really germane here to anyone in our group who's thinking about, well, yeah, if high schools or if all schools need change, and if we need to bring this kind of thing in, just help me with two sort of mechanical questions, as it were. You weren't, or you were, which is it, an all-day alternative? And the other,
Okay, go ahead.
and
Yep.
yeah, the other is, what criteria did you use, and how did you go about recruiting faculty?
Oh, excellent questions. The first is we were not a full day program. When Sean and I created this, one of the things that had bothered us is that there was a lot of great programs out there helping kids, and almost all of them. I can't say all because I don't know them all, but at least everyone that we saw was doing good work and not touching core curriculum. They were not accrediting kids for English, social studies, science, and math. And Sean and I said, if we're going to create an alternative to the existing school, we have to go after core content. And so that was one criteria. And we realized we couldn't start by being a comprehensive all-day high school. We had too much to learn. We knew we were going to make too many mistakes. So we started as a half-day program, and we offered a finite number of courses, both core and elective. So in terms of criteria, it evolved over time, but I think when Sean and I first started interviewing for our team, we really focused heavily on, does this person give a damn about anything other than a teaching job? So we would say, like, Al, tell me about your hobbies. And if sometimes we'd get deer in headlights. Well, I like to read. Well, of course you do. You're an English teacher. But what's your hobby? Right? And we would all of a sudden we'd hear one guy who's still a big teacher. He goes, you know what? I love the outdoors. I love fishing and hunting. And he goes, it's a science to me. He goes, I'm down to specific types of arrows and scents and where I'm going to go. And he goes, I've practiced for years to get good at this. Like that's criteria one met. Somebody, you have to have curiosity. You have to have wonder. You can't lose that sense of wonder. The second one was a tougher one. And this sounds like it's counterintuitive, but we had to find teachers that were so well steeped in their content that they could walk away from it. And by that, I mean, I needed an English teacher or history teacher or a science teacher who knew so much about their content and were so confident in their knowledge that they had the ability then to set that content aside for a while and work with kids and get to know kids and get them engaged in their passion and know that they had the expertise that when the moment arrived to introduce an important standard or content, they had the ability to do so without lots of planning. That's the second criteria. The third criteria is they really had to be in our paradigm. And so we had to ask a lot of questions about trying to get at what paradigm of education and that they saw. And so we were really looking for what we call learner-centered paradigm, not a curriculum-centered paradigm. That was the toughest one to find because people's answers, sometimes they know how to answer the question, but without actually being in that paradigm. You probably experienced that too. And we had mistakes. We had 2 or 3 errors, but they're fine people, but they realized pretty quickly they didn't buy into what we were trying to do, and so we found them different places. But those are really the 3.
Were the faculty engaged in the projects with the students?
Yes. So
did they self-select into that? How did that dynamic unfold?
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for this, but this is my co-founder Sean's brilliance coming through. When we first started, our second year, we had 60 kids. We had 3 teachers, and they sat down, and the immediate inclination is, well, here's a project with the city of Cedar Rapids to create urban orchards in the parks. That looks like a Sean job because Sean's our science teacher. And Sean said, wait a minute. I know that stuff and I'm going to get in their way. I know so much about that. I know I'm just going to get in their way. So we had the English teacher take lead on the project to create urban orchards in the community. And so they all agreed they would take projects that seemed interesting to them, but was out of their quote expertise. That turned out to be one of the best decisions we made because immediately the students figured out that, well, the English teacher's sitting here. I can't ask them this question about soil acidity and pH levels, and because he doesn't know, right? And so it became this, we're in this together. And the English teacher, Nate, is like, I'm interested in learning this stuff as you are. And so they went on explorations together. And then Sean, who was there, when they get stuck, then Sean would come in and provide the more depth and the understanding of why things were. But yeah, the teachers were very much a part of the project. The challenging part for the teacher just like the kids, they were so used to being the leader and the person who knew all the stuff that their natural inclination, because they wanted Big to be successful, so it came from a good place. Their inclination was if the kids were screwing up the project with a community partner in that, they wanted to step in and fix it. Right? They wanted to fix it because they're used to these final demonstrations of learning have to look perfectly glossed and ready. And we just continually had to just remind them, it's okay if they fail. Let the project fail. We work with our business partners. Our business partners don't give us projects that have such incredible weight that if they fall apart, it's going to damage their organization. These typically are projects they wouldn't have done anyway, or would like to do, but can't get to it. And so once our teachers started to understand to step back and see that there's a train wreck coming, give them some warning signals, flash a few red lights, but if those students driving that, engineering that train wanted to proceed, we were going to let them proceed. And the most powerful learning came from projects that fell apart, because we would do what we call a post-mortem on the projects and go, oh, well, this was a train wreck. What happened? And the kids would just start talking. Well, we didn't do this. And, we said we were going to follow up on this, but none of us did. And I didn't do what I was supposed to. And right, like, okay, great. Now you're going to enter a new project. What are you taking with you so the next one doesn't fail? And it was those learning opportunities, because the teacher wasn't the expert, because the teacher was part of the project, that I think caused some projects to be really beautiful, whether they failed or they didn't fail. Because one quick thing, and I'll be quiet, but one of the things that we found with project-based schools, they're great, except so many of them see the project as the final assessment where the grade comes. And back to our earlier conversation, as soon as you tell them the final project is graded, all kinds of fear comes into play, right? And I'm not going to take a chance because I got to get a good grade. Projects were never part of the grade, never part of the final assessment. It was the process of getting the project accomplished or not accomplished. So the projects that failed, right, that blew up in our faces, we would sit down and talk to the kids about all the things they learned. Incredible amount of learning. We help them understand it's not the project you're getting graded on. The project failed. You didn't fail. What did you learn? Back to the point of it, I'm not going to put this in red ink and forever tell people that you're a terrible team member because you sucked on this project, right? You learn something, go apply it. And so that's what happened when we had students long enough to run through those kind of cycles.
Well, students had to be self-assessing, and they had to be continuous learners.
Mm-hmm.
What happened, and let me conclude this initial session with this question, and we'll pick it up in a second segment. What happened then when students just didn't play the role that Big was expecting of them?
Yeah, and we had our fair share of those. What we really looked at assessment is conversational. So our teachers had regular one-on-ones with every student. And so it was a conversation. Talk about these standards you learn, talk about where you're growing. And we use those opportunities because the kids are usually pretty truthful. Like, yeah, I'm not a very good team member. Well, why? Why were you not a good teamer? Didn't care about that project. Why did you pick it? Because my best friend was on it. And I just wanted to hang out with Al all day. So whatever Al wanted to do, that's what I was going to do. But I hated the project. Like, what are we going to learn from this, right? This is not good. So pick something you care about. So it would just be through those conversations, and sometimes kids would pick the ball up and start running, and other times that they wouldn't. And for those students, they had a pretty normal high school experience because they would just get to the point of, I just want to get validated for these standards and get out of here. And so a lot of it was, the school that you're coming from does a lot better job at that than we do. So why don't you just go back and do that? And so, and those remain the most challenging for us, to know that they had this opportunity and we couldn't get them to take the one step forward that we needed them to take. And we always saw it as our problem, our fault, but and I think we continued to get better at figuring that out. But undoing 10 years of formal education and how you're supposed to behave in a traditional school, turns out you can't turn that around in 18 months for most people.
Wow. Al, let's close with having you comment on this. I know you did a lot of interviews of students after their projects were completed. Did you have experiences where you were doing interviews where the projects had, as Trace said, failed? They had not worked out, and therefore it was sort of a post-mortem of a different kind.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I had a project that and a group and a team myself, and I would call our project to be in terms of level of difficulty something kind of in the middle, where they were uh, dealing with getting a local park or a local city uh, uh, certified as a bird-friendly city, and they had to go through all these criteria of the state and set up an event that went with Bird Day and all this kind of thing. And so there were a lot of moving parts, and there were things that instantly worked. There were things that crash and burned, and so you sit down in the debrief, and you have to ask some questions and 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 so it's in those questions that you really, and by the way, for me, in my inner world experience of being the interviewer, I'm simultaneously experiencing the same behavior that they're exhibiting. You find that you are co-conspirators of limits or no limits on yourself.
Aha.
And that is where everything resides in here when you start thinking, no matter what the experience is, no matter what the experience is, I'm going to keep my promise that I'm going to grow as much goodness in this moment as possible, regardless of how it feels in me or anybody else. And so to love this kind of work demands something that we were talking about earlier. And it's a life universal lesson. And the lesson is to love something demands courage. It demands that you move away from that past point, those habits, your regrets, all the different kinds of things that fell short, the things that you were hardest with yourself on, the things that you hide out from. How much hiding and pretending do you do? And just go with the truth. And the truth, I can remember colleague Mick, he says, yep, the truth is going to set us free here again. And you go right down at it head on. And that kind of experience can become quite contagious. And so, Trace, I just got to share this today because we've had a conversation about it. I got to tell you a quick story, Bill, and it's universal. I was doing a project for the city, the same city that had all those parks kind of thing, and we were doing a fundraiser, and I was promoting people to get an engraved brick to put in the plaza. And I met hundreds of people, but one particular individual came by and just on a Saturday morning and said to me, you know what? I hate this project. And here's what I hate about the city and what it's doing. And I hate this change and that. And 10 minutes of hate. And I listened. And then I just said, very calmly looked the individual in the eye and I said, you know what? you really love what you hate. And the individual was just startled. And then quickly followed up with, well, to be truthful, I just really hate change. And I said, oh, don't we all? Don't we all? And it's in that moment where two people, whether it's you and me and Trace, or you and I, or anybody else, or you're sitting with a group of kids one-on-one, parents, it doesn't matter. Because you know what? We all live in that place. And at some point, no matter what the experience is, keep your promise. To what, in what way, right now, in presence, can I live with the love that it could unfold right now in terms of doing a project, treating one another differently, sharing in the goodness of what's going on? Live in that space, because when you're in that space, that's when you go, you know what? Those love-hate things that we all have in us as human beings, they really are about, they're about the truth. And one of the truths is it demands courage in terms of what you're going to do next. And that's where things get really authentic. And you're becoming authentic. It's not a curriculum. No, it's an in the moment, high-powered experience where thought, emotion, feelings, sensations, patterns, habits, everything that exists to you to that moment, that's where it happens. And that's where you find the opportunity to exist in a different space in regard to what life is. And that's what the big experience is. But you know what? I'll bet you by the end of the day, I have many more big experiences where there's things I like, things I don't like. I might even get a little polarity in there. I love this, but I hate this. And you start looking at this and you go, wait a minute, hold on. Knock on wood. Self, what are you doing here? Are you putting yourself in the wood chipper and just gonna tear yourself up and come out different, or what? That is what the soul experience of Iowa Big is, and it's the soul experience that we all have, regardless of what form it takes. And it's in those moments, to me, where with that awareness, you can optimize, amplify, you can reshape everything right now in the moment. And once you have a bunch of those experiences, things really start looking different. It's really a big deal, right, Trace? It's a big deal.
Well, what I get from that is it's the capacity we have to respond rather than react. Because reaction just comes from being on automatic pilot and impulse and habit. And I think in what both of you have shared, and I want to thank you for that, is about how a truly responsive, and I'll also say insightful, educational learning model got created, incredible inner sensitivity and perception that broke the mold. Okay, because at the early part of our conversation, we were being very critical of standard operating procedure in schools. And the courage that it took on the part of both of you to step beyond that. And for that, I have been with both of you deeply respectful and admire what you've done. What I'd like to do in a next interview is probe a couple of things. So a little bit further with you, Trace. I happen to know from inside information, since I put a chapter in my most recent book about Iowa BIG, I know that there was a set of principles and a set of criteria that you established that became culture definers for you. And I'd love to have you share more about those principles, et cetera, because it took a lot to build a very different kind of culture in a learning environment where the students were still spending half of their time back in the old environment. Okay, so I'd like to probe that, and also what you've been learning in traveling around the country, working with other quote innovative models, and what you see that from your perspective, from our shared perspective here, what works and what doesn't work. Because my sense of it is it's very easy to go from one extreme to the other. Basically, where it's nothing but routine and convention run everything, and the other is it's free will and license given to the students to do whatever they want. I mean, if I can say that that's two extremes, I'm sure you've encountered that polarity and have some things to share about it. So thank you both. I really appreciate it. And audience, thank you. I hope you've gained as much from this as I've gained from working with them, not only over the years, but in today's dialogue. So thank you, and join us again, because we'll continue this in a next episode. Thanks. Bye-bye.